Great. And I can see the attendees coming. I'm going to wait just for a couple of seconds so that the majority of people will be tagging along. Okay, my introduction is going to be very, very short because I'm just providing technical support for this fantastic event. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Evangelos Himonides from the UCL Centre for Holocaust Education. I will be on the side, out of your way, and I will let the webinar convener, now my colleague Ruth-Anne, take over and introduce our esteemed guest. Please enjoy this webinar, and I hope that everything goes well and that you have a wonderful time. Thank you very much. Yeah.
UCL Centre for Holocaust Education is really, truly delighted to welcome you to this live webinar evening with Professor Yehuda Bauer. My name is Ruth-Anne Lenga, and I'm Programme Director of the Centre. It's great to have you join us and for us to join you in your homes or wherever you may be right now via your computers and your mobile devices. Well, this event sold out in just a few days, and we have 500 of you tuning in right now, which is absolutely remarkable. This is testament, of course, to our eminent speaker, whose forensic knowledge and fearless approach to take on those who marginalize, minimalize, misuse, chip away, downplay, or flatly deny the Holocaust has made him a guardian of this historical record. He is known among his fellow historians for regularly and persistently reviewing new evidence and rethinking in the light of it, a quality not always seen in the works of the great and the good, and surely is the mark of a true scholar. He's also known for his often trenchant views, solidly backed up with decades of scholarship. So you know, and I know, that there is no better person we could have brought to you tonight to help us grasp and better understand the nature of Holocaust distortion, how to recognize this violation of Holocaust historiography, the many forms it takes across ideological, political, and cultural divides, and the fundamental threat that Holocaust distortion poses to civilized society. Now, I can still see that more people are coming in, so while that takes place, I'll just say a few words about our audience. Well, this evening has brought together people of various professional backgrounds. These include teachers from our Beacon School program, some of their pupils, students from our Master's MA module program in Holocaust Education, senior staff of the Core Academy Trust in Birmingham, who we proudly partner with on their Echo Eternal Holocaust project, and wider networks of teachers who are just coming to the end of a hugely difficult term due to this pandemic. We're also joined by the UK delegates of IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and the head of the UK delegation, Sir Eric Pickles. And I'd just like to point out that there is this very important document, relatively newly published document for teachers that I highly recommend you take a good look at, because it really is the most excellent publication that guides so very well teachers who are working in this field, in this very challenging work of teaching and learning about the Holocaust. We also have stakeholders here tonight from organizations including the UKHMF, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, AJR, HET, the Huddersfield Learning Centre. We have NGOs from genocide awareness groups, university lecturers and students from across the country, the Pears Foundation, and many other friends of the centre. I'd also like to add that we know that there are members of Yehuda's own family in Israel and in London tuning in as well. And I would also like to say that we're very particularly honoured to see survivors of the Holocaust and second generations here too. So thank you all for Zooming in. I just want to thank my colleague, Professor Evangelos Himonides, who has facilitated the technical arrangements for tonight and the related security measures, which I just feel I do need to mention to you. One of which is sadly that your mics have been muted and your cameras disabled, and there will not be a chat feature. But I would mention that this event is being recorded and will be made available via our centre's website in due course. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our guest speaker, Professor Yehuda Bauer, who will address us on the subject of Holocaust distortion. Yehuda.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to my colleagues in London and to you personally. You mentioned family. Well, you are part of the family, so you were talking about yourself as well. And but there's no influence by the family on what I'm going to say. This is now 75 years after the end of World War II. And normally one would say that after 75 years, things sort of fade from the memory, or the memory fades. But in actual fact, what happens with the Holocaust is the other way around. More and more, World War II generally, and the Holocaust specifically, are part of the political discussion. We are not talking about the past. The Holocaust is not the past. The Holocaust is present, because the elements that created the Holocaust, that were sort of put into place by what was happening in World War II, exist today. And what happened then might, of course, things never repeat themselves exactly, but might happen again in some form or other. And in fact, are already happening, have been happening. So we are talking about the present. And one of the interesting ways in which this comes about is something very topical. The Russian president, Vladimir Putin, published a major article in an American conservative journal called The National Interest on June 18th, just about a month ago or so, in which he presented the Russian perspective of the developments that led to the outbreak of the war itself, and its aftermath. This is typical for distortion, you see. It's not that it's untrue. Large parts of it are true, are correct, just completely one-sided. And of course there are mistakes, to put it in inverted commas. In other words, a typical case of distortion, a mixture of truth and untruth that are dangerous, more dangerous than outright lies. Now, the importance of World War II is tremendous. And more people realize, and people who don't deal with the Holocaust from an educational or political or any other point of view, realize that the Holocaust was at the center of the events of World War II, but not recognized as such at the time, and not even immediately afterwards. It took decades before the Holocaust became a kind of a defining event within World War II. And the point is that it could happen again, which is why you are listening to this lecture, because you don't want this to happen again. Not it and not something like it. And so we have to differentiate there between outright denial and distortion. Because denial, of course, means that you say that the Holocaust didn't happen, or that the Nazis never intended a genocide of the Jewish people, that the numbers of Jewish victims was relatively small, that the events that happened to the Jews were really repeated in many ways with other peoples at other times during World War II, outside of World War II, nothing very special. This is denial. Now, with the trial in London, 1999-2000, of Deborah Lipstadt, who argued that the British Holocaust denier, David Irving, was an anti-Semite and a Holocaust denier. And she was accused by David Irving of not saying the truth. And there was a tremendous trial, which many of you remember. And the result of the trial was that the British judge, Mr. Gray, decided that David Irving was an anti-Semite, that the Holocaust had taken place, that there was no basis for the denial. The result of that trial was that in the West, the Holocaust denial receded into the background. There are still pockets in the West of Holocaust deniers, but they are relatively unimportant. This is completely different from some of the Muslim countries, not all of them, where Holocaust denial is the general view of the intellectuals or the politicians and so on and so forth. But we are dealing now not with a denial as such, which, as I said, in the West, and I'm talking to people from the UK and from Israel, we are faced with something else. What is distortion? Distortion is to say, yeah, the Holocaust happened, sure. It was terrible. Yes. We didn't do it, whoever the we is. The Germans did it, only the Germans, nobody else. Yes, there were a few bad eggs amongst us, whoever the us is, who collaborated with the Germans, who denounced the Jews, who participated in the destruction of the Jews. But the vast majority of us, whoever the us is, didn't want the Holocaust to happen. We were against it. We tried to rescue the Jews. There were so many, many, many rescued, you know. And we tried our best. The Jews didn't always collaborate. Some of them refused to be helped. And of course, there were Jewish collaborators with the Germans as well, not only amongst us, whoever the us is. Now, this kind of a statement means that there is actually a denial of the facts of World War II. Because what happened, in fact, was that the Holocaust happened all over Nazi-occupied or Nazi-influenced Europe, either by the Germans or by countries that collaborated with the Germans or were occupied by the Germans. Now, without the help of sometimes a minority, sometimes a large part of the population, sometimes arguably a majority of the local population without their help, there could have been no Holocaust. Because the Germans didn't know how to differentiate between Jews and Lithuanians, or Jews and Poles, and Jews or Hungarians, and Jews or anyone else. The number of Jews who could be identified as such, dressed in traditional Jewish ultra-Orthodox clothing, were relatively small. Several percentage points, some 10, 15, 20%. But the vast majority of the Jews looked like everyone else in their neighborhood. Without the help of the local population, no Holocaust could have happened. Now, this is a denial of what happened, and the denial is used as a distortion, because what happens then is, again, yes, we actually love Jews, you know, especially dead ones, especially Jews who were killed by the Germans, not by anyone else, but by the Germans. And of course, it's quite true. The vast majority of the Jews were killed by the Germans, by Nazi Germany, not by Hungarians, Lithuanians, Poles, Romanians, or others. It's quite true. But without the help of these people, it couldn't have happened. Not only that, the emphasis on the rescuers is perfectly correct. Without the rescuers, you, the teachers in the United Kingdom, cannot teach, because you cannot teach death. Impossible. The rescuers, what was called by Al Hashem the righteous among the non-Jews. Without dealing with them, you can't teach, because you have to show that there was another way which was taken by a minority, a small minority. But without their existence, we cannot teach the Holocaust, and they existed. Now, of course, in absolute numbers, they're quite a number. Let me take Poland as an example for everything I'm saying. Now, why Poland? Why the emphasis on the Polish situation? The total number of victims of the Holocaust, Jews who were killed by Nazis and their collaborators, helpers, and so on, is between 5.6 and 5.7, 5.8 million. We can't arrive at a total number, both because of the definition of who Jews are, but mainly because in the eastern part of Europe, in the areas occupied by the Soviet Union in 1939, and in the Soviet Union, the parts of it that were occupied by the Germans, we don't really know how many Jews were killed. There are no detailed statistics of every place. But it's quite clear, and this was done by, this research was done both in Israel and in Germany and elsewhere. The number, the figure, more or less, is in the range that I mentioned, 5.6 and 5.8. But 3 million of these people, in other words, the majority, were Jews who had lived in Poland within its 1939 borders, you see. Now, the reason why we concentrate on Poland is because the Polish Jews, or the Jews who lived in Poland at the time before the war, were the majority of the victims. So obviously, what interests us centrally, not that the other things don't interest us, but what we have to deal with as a central issue is Poland. Now, in Poland, there's no denial of the Holocaust. You can't deny the Holocaust in Poland. There's no such thing. But in Poland, you are told by the government and by its academic lackeys that, first of all, there were a huge number of rescuers, secondly, that the vast majority of the Polish people, yes, with some exceptions, helped the Jews or wanted to help the Jews. And as I said, not always did the Jews collaborate. And of course, there were Jewish councils, Judenräte, who collaborated with the Germans. Yes, they were forced to do so. But there was Polish suffering. And the people who describe what was happening in Poland ignore, so they say, the suffering of the Polish people. Now again, you see, you have truth and untruth mixed here. It's perfectly correct to say that what the Germans did to the Poles, to the ethnic Poles in Poland, was a genocide. According to the definition of the United Nations, Google it, of December 9, 1948, which says the genocide is the intent and action to annihilate an ethnic, national, racial, or religious group as such, in whole or in part. In whole were the Jews, in part were the Poles. That is genocide. And indeed, the Nazis wanted to eliminate the Polish people as a people, not as individuals, because they needed them as slave laborers. So there was a genocide, and some 2 million Poles died as a result of German action. So no, we don't deny Polish suffering, quite the contrary. If that were the attitude of our Polish colleagues in the government and the various academic institutions that the government controls. In other words, yes, there was suffering on both sides, but there was a tremendous difference, because all Jews, in whole or in part, you see, all Jews were slated for murder, not only in Poland, not only in Europe, but all over the world, and this can be proved. Documentary proof of that, of the desire of the Nazi leadership to extend the extermination of the Jews globally. There is no precedent for that in the annals of humanity. No precedent at all. This unprecedentedness is something that the Polish distorters of Holocaust memory cannot really accept. And as I said, yes, they establish museums because they say the Holocaust happened. We didn't do it, but they did it. We establish museums. We build statues. We commemorate the places of extermination. We try to keep the places where Jewish life existed in Poland before the war as places that have to be remembered. We pay money for that. And yes, but it's not us, it's they. Now, who tells us the truth? There's a group of Polish liberal historians who are part of the minority that opposes the general nationalistic government of today in Poland. Poles who tell us what happened. And there are publications in Polish. I hope the major one of them will soon be appearing in English. It's called, to translate the title, The Night Still Continues. Or in Polish, for those of you who know Polish, Dalej jest noc. And in there, there's no denial of the heroism of the rescuers. No. Rescuers exist there. But Jews who managed to escape from German trains, who managed to escape from ghettos and try to hide among the Polish population, where else could they hide? Most of them were delivered to the Germans or killed by the Polish population out of fear sometimes, justified fear. Because if the Germans were told by Poles who would denounce their neighbors that there were Jews hiding in the village or the township, the Germans might come and take terrible revenge on the Poles. So Jews were delivered either to the Germans directly, because as I said, the Germans couldn't tell the difference between a Jew and a Pole, generally speaking. Or they were delivered to the Polish police under German control, some 18,000 Polish policemen all over Poland, to whom the local population who denounced Jews handed over the Jews, or they found them themselves, and then they handed them over to the Germans or killed them themselves. Now the numbers are extremely difficult to establish. And among those Polish liberal historians, there's an argument, as there should be, among academics who rely on different kinds of evidence and so on, and a number of Jews who were killed directly or indirectly by the local Polish population is estimated at between 130,000 and 200,000. The vast majority, close to 3 million, were killed not by Poles, but by Germans. Yes, but there was a very important percentage, small but important, of between 5 and 7% of Jews who had managed to escape the German net, but did not survive because they were denounced. Now, how many rescuers were there? Again, very difficult to establish. Yad Vashem has recognized close to 7,000 Polish rescuers. That's the largest number, ethnically, nationally speaking, of rescuers recognized by Yad Vashem. Close to 7,000. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that there were many more than 7,000 because they did not survive. Nobody knew their names. They were killed along with the Jews whom they tried to hide. Or they were not remembered because the Jews who were rescued did not remember their names. And after the war, this was extremely difficult to establish. And after the war, the Polish society was anti-Semitic and persecuted the Jews and killed them. And so anyone who had rescued Jews was considered to be a traitor by many of his co-nationals after the war. And so we don't know the real number. But let us assume for a moment, and I'm exaggerating, that there were 3 times more rescuers than Yad Vashem recognized. And if you add their family members, you might receive a number somewhere in the tens of thousands. It's possible. But there were 21 million ethnic Poles in Poland, and the Jews were everywhere. In every small village there were a Jew or two. And those tens of thousands were a tiny proportion of the Polish people. Tremendously heroic people. Tremendously heroic people. Let me tell you a story. Many of you have heard me before, and you know how I love telling stories, and many of you may have heard the story before. It's a small girl whose parents were denounced by parents, and her baby brother were denounced by Poles, or the father and the brother were killed by Poles, and the mother was delivered to the German by a Pole. But she was blonde, had blue eyes, still had blue eyes. She's a grandmother by now, obviously. White hair. And she spoke perfect Polish. And she began wandering among Polish villages. And she said that she was Polish, and people accepted them because they believed her. But then at night, very often, out of the trauma of what she had experienced, people realized that she was Jewish, and they said, you can't stay here, you have to leave. They did not deliver her to the Germans, but they say, go away. And so she wandered from place to place. And then she arrived at one point in a village, she doesn't remember the name, of course. And she was totally at the end of her wits. She was hungry, her clothes were torn. And there was a church in the village, like in every good Polish village. And next to the village, like everywhere, there was a small structure for the priest to live. And there was an old woman there who cleaned it up for him and who cooked for him and so on. And she knocked at the door. And the priest, of course, immediately realized what this girl was about. And he called her in, and she said he sent her his the woman help to the village, got some food, got some rags, some clothes, because the girl was dressed in rags. He dressed her, he fed her. She stayed for a couple of nights, and he said, I can't keep you because I'm a priest here and everyone knows what I'm doing. And if they find out that I'm hiding a girl, they immediately realize that you're Jewish. So you must swear to me by your God, not my God, your God, that you will tell no one your real Jewish name. And she swore to him. And he said, look, go to this next village, go to this address. I hope the peasants there will help you. And then he pulled out something just totally unusual. Now this is 1943, a godforsaken village in the middle of nowhere in Poland. He pulled out a bar of chocolate. Now chocolate in 1943 in a Polish village was like diamonds, like gold. And he gave her the chocolate. Now she didn't remember, of course she didn't ask, the name of the priest, the name of the village. He didn't rescue her. He helped her. Well, he did rescue her, of course. And then he helped her. And then he sent her away. But what she remembers to this day as a grandmother was that bar of chocolate. That bar of chocolate. So there were rescuers like that we don't know about. Yes, there were. We should always remember their heroism. A tiny, tiny minority. Many of them delivered by the denunciation, Poles denounced them to the Polish police or to the Germans. And they and the Jews who they were trying to hide were murdered. Now, can we arrive at a common language with these people in Poland today? Theoretically, yes. I have no problem, as I told you, in recognizing the fact of a genocide of the Polish people. I have no problem in recognizing the tremendous suffering of Poles. Yes? Nor do I have a problem in recognizing that the vast majority of the Polish population in World War II was anti-Semitic. I am not saying that. They said it. I'll give you an example. There was a vast Polish underground, which after the beginning of 1942 was called the Home Army, or in Polish, Armia Krajowa, AK. And in their report to the Polish government in exile in London, they said, the Polish people are anti-Semitic. Don't publish anything in favor of the Jews in London, because then you will lose the support of the Polish population back home. Now, the distorters in Poland say that the Polish government in exile helped the Jews. And it's quite true that in June 1942 and again in December 1942, the Polish government in exile, because they thought that American Jews were very influential in America, which is totally mistaken. That's what they believed. The Polish government has to say something about the destruction of the Jews in Poland. And it's due to the Polish government in exile that in December 1942, the Allied governments declared publicly, openly, that the Germans are murdering the Jews. And then, of course, some historians, including Jewish historians, say, why didn't they help after that? And the answer is tragic and simple. Even if they had wanted to, they couldn't have. Why? Because the Jews were under German control, not Allied control. And there's no military way they could be helped. Anglo-American aircraft did not cross the Elbe River in central Germany to the east, where the mass annihilation of the Jews was taking place, because there were no fighter planes to accompany Allied bombers. Simple, isn't it? They couldn't have helped even if they had wanted to. Did they want to? I don't know. But it's really immaterial. And when they did have the possibility of helping, it was too late. It was too late. That's the question of why Auschwitz wasn't bombed. But that no longer is a distortion of the memory of the Holocaust. That is already an argument about what they could have done. And the distortion is not just in Poland. Now, I concentrated on Poland for reasons that I explained. But if you take, for instance, some of our colleagues in Hungary, who argue that after the occupation of Hungary by the Germans on March 19, 1944, Hungary was no longer independent. And when the Jews of Hungary in the provinces were deported to Auschwitz, the Hungarians were helpless because it was the Germans who ruled. This is a total lie, total distortion. In fact, the deportation of the Hungarian Jews was stopped by the Hungarians because they thought wrongly that the Allies cared. That a bombing of Budapest on July 2nd, 1944 had taken place because of the deportation of the Jews to Auschwitz. It's totally mistaken. But as a result of that, the Hungarian government declared to the Germans that they were stopping the deportations. In other words, they could have stopped it before. There were practically very few Germans who supervised the deportations, about 150 of them. The Jews of Hungary who were deported to Auschwitz were deported by Hungarians with the support of the vast majority of the Hungarian population, with exceptions, including the support for the deportations, except for Jewish converts, by the Catholic Church of the time. With an exception, the Archbishop of one of the major Hungarian cities opposed the deportations, but he was alone. So you see, the distortion is not just in Poland. And in Lithuania, the vast majority of the people there say, it's not us, it's the Germans. That's mistaken, to put it mildly. In fact, most Lithuanian Jews were murdered by Lithuanians under German control. And the German control was tiny, tiny. It was led by a small group of SS men. And those of you who know some Jewish history will be surprised to learn that the name of the German who was responsible for that group that supervised the killing of Jews by Lithuanians was Joachim Hamann. And now there is a movement in Lithuania to recognize as heroes Lithuanians who opposed the Soviet regime, who died as a result of Soviet acts. The fact that these very same people opposed the Soviets because they collaborated with the Germans and were responsible for killing of Jews. That is something that the Lithuanian government doesn't want to interfere with. That's a question of a freedom of discussion in Lithuania. There are Lithuanian authors and German authors who tell us the truth, who deal with the details, and we know the details. And the problem that we face is the identification of the Israeli government with the distortion of the Holocaust, especially in Poland. Because you see, the political and economic and security relationship between Israel and Poland are great. So why have this problem of the Holocaust interfere there? So the Israeli government decided to settle this with the Polish government. They nominated two people to negotiate with the Poles. We don't know to this day exactly who the Polish side were. The two people who were nominated, one of them is an expert on aeronautics, and the other one was a general manager of the Israeli Foreign Office. Neither of them are experts on the Holocaust or history or Poland. And they arrived at an agreement with the Polish government. And the agreement was published. It accepted the Polish narrative completely. Yes, you know, there was a Holocaust, sure, but we recognize the tremendous sufferings of the Polish people and who tried to help the Jews and so on. And anti-Semitism is defined in the document, 28th of June 2018, is defined as the same thing as anti-Polonism by the Jews. So see, over 2,000 years of anti-Semitism equals the opposition of some Poles, or some Jews, to Poles who denounced them or who attacked them and so on. It's the same thing. Now, Yad Vashem doesn't normally react to things like that. Yad Vashem is a non-political organization. We are not engaged in Israeli politics. There's an agreement. It's not written down. There's no law. There's no stated, no statement by anyone. But we don't deal with politics. This was an exception. It was so gross and so dangerous that Yad Vashem, the head of the Research Institute of Yad Vashem, and our two experts on Poland, but not only they, with one exception, all the academics working at Yad Vashem, including myself, including the director of Yad Vashem, were consulted and agreed with two statements, a very brief one, that we don't accept the statement by the Polish and the Israeli prime ministers, and a very detailed one explaining why we don't accept. because we don't accept distortion of the Holocaust. So what I'm saying is not only directed against the Polish nationalism, but against the collaborators on the Israeli side as well. Now you see, there's a problem there. I'm being very frank. I always have been, as many of you know. There is a wave of nationalism, extreme nationalism, all over the world. From communist, so-called communist China, through Putin's Russia, through Trump's America, all over the world. It's very strong. It's no longer a question of right and left. The opposition to the nationalism, to the kind of distortion I'm talking about, is in the hands of a conservative leader in Germany, Angela Merkel. She's the head of a conservative party, no left-winger. Her ally in France is no left-winger either, he's a centrist. And in your own country, in the United Kingdom, the government is in the hands of conservatives. The distortion was reputedly a problem of the left until the left changed its leadership. Now, you may agree or disagree with what the government in London is doing, but there's no doubt that it supports a basically liberal approach, freedom of expression, a independence of the judiciary, an attempt for sexual equality, an attitude that says basically what we want is negotiations on problems that we disagree on, and a government, a system of government where the minority can win elections and turn into majority. Now, that is democracy. And the countries that I mentioned are opposed to that. I could carry on. My time is up. What do? You will ask me, probably with emails. What should we do? I say, and I'm talking to educators mainly, the only real answer is education. Fortify the ones who have not made up their minds that democracy, liberalism, and denial of the denial of the distortion on a very central topic, because as I said, the Holocaust has not disappeared. It's there. And all of you are listening in because you don't want this thing to happen again. Don't use slogans. Don't say never again, because it's ever again. Never again is a stupid slogan. Act educationally. And if you live in democratic countries, according to your political views, in a liberal way, in an open way, in a way that we hope our children, children's children, and the next generation may follow after us. Thank you.
Microphone, you're on.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Bauer, for that triumph of a lecture. You provoked us to the acute violation of distortion to Holocaust memory and record, and the danger in the light of the global wave of nationalism, and also to the importance to fight, to deny the denial, the importance of action and the importance of education, and for liberal, open principles. So I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for that amazing lecture that we are so used to you giving, and you didn't disappoint us. Of course you didn't. Unfortunately, we are unable to open questions to the floor, because I know that there's so many people, so many teachers I know are out there listening in, and will want to have asked you questions perhaps particularly about education. You raised so much about the importance of talking about those rescuers, those precious few, and the importance of that. And I know they would want to put questions to you on that. We're unable to do that for security reasons. So in advance, questions did come to you for me to put to you, Yehuda. And I'm going to put, I chose a couple that relate to the sort of popular themes that were coming up in the questions that were sent to us. So my first question to you is this, and we'd be delighted for your response. What do you think, Yehuda, what should the international community do in response to those countries that avoid confronting the truth of the past and actively seek to refute their nation's share of culpability for the Holocaust?
Well, the basic problem is that there's no such thing as an international community. International, yes. Community, no. You're using terms, I'm using terms, which are basically wrong. We were talking about United Nations. Nations, yes. United. You're talking about European Union. European, sure. Union? You're talking about African Union. African, yes. Union? You're talking about Security Council. There's a council. Security? Don't make me laugh. Yeah? So there's no international community. The United Nations are extremely important because they are the place where these international contacts are worked out. There's no community. There is the possibility of influencing nations, governments, even empires. At the moment, we are a minority. The liberals are a minority. It's Western Europe, Central Europe. It's some places in Eastern Europe. I mean, if you take, for instance, you take an example, Romania. The Romanians managed to kill hundreds of thousands of Jews without the direct German influence. But the Romanians wrote about it. They opened the archives. They became in Eastern Europe a liberal element, just like Germany, because the murder came from Germany, Nazi Germany, became the center of anti-Nazism, of liberalism. So you have Romania. Huh? You have other countries like that. So there's a liberal opposition to the anti-liberal. We have to be part of that. IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which you mentioned, and as you know, I'm the honorary chairman of that. We are trying our best. It's very difficult. 34 governments, not all of whom are on the liberal side, to put it mildly. Yeah? So it takes a lot of work and a lot of negotiation to push through some liberal points. And one of the main liberal points you mentioned at the beginning, we are trying to create educational directives or educational suggestions for teachers. And that's a liberal effort. Our working groups, our committees. We just passed a resolution attacking the genocide and the discrimination of the Roma, the so-called gypsies. We passed a resolution with great difficulty, attacking those who try to commemorate the murderers because they were anti-Soviet. 137 names of such people. And we hope slowly to be able to do something about that. So yes, we are doing things. But I don't want to be under any illusion or create an illusion. It's extremely difficult to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Yehuda. And you drew out the importance of education, and that takes me to the next question, the final question. I just have two for you. And it goes like this. In classrooms and other educational settings, perhaps like museums, do you think that distortion should be addressed explicitly as part of the teaching and learning about the Holocaust? Or is it merely enough to say that when students learn the facts, the accurate facts about the Holocaust, that is by definition countering Holocaust distortion?
No, I don't think that. On the other hand, you see, you can't put into a museum a topical argument. I mean, that doesn't work. What you have to do is to state the facts, namely that there is a discussion. This is what these people say. This is the truth. And to distribute this in educational surroundings. I don't think that a direct relationship between a museum, between contents of a museum and the discussion about distortion is a practical possibility. What you can do is to present in a museum the truth. In other words, the actual facts as we know them. And we know them due to what? Due to the work of Polish historians, yeah? Due to the work of Hungarian historians, due to the work of some wonderful Lithuanians, yeah? Who are doing fantastic work. So yes, we can present the facts and then let the other side attack us. That is wonderful.
Yehuda, so you don't feel that perhaps because distortion is perhaps increasing and is such a sort of complex thing, it can be, manifest in many different ways, that we don't have a duty to perhaps equip young people who perhaps before they're going to university and that equip them with sort of the awareness of what this is, and that they can recognize and confront it and address it if they see it. Do you not feel it is something that does have a place nowadays in emerging and developing curriculum about the Holocaust?
No, I think we should certainly equip young people to do that. Absolutely. And there are discussions. For instance, there was two actually meetings, just one recently in Paris, where the official position of the nationalist Polish government was expressed, but there was an opposition to that. There was an argument, and there was, as a result of that, a tremendous wave of anti-liberal statements in some Polish media. Now I read Polish, so I can follow what they're saying. It's quite amazing statements that come out of there. But that's yes, certainly we should confront it. Now, generally speaking, I'm against defense. I don't think defense is a good idea. If you don't attack the attackers, they will attack again. You have to say to distorters, you are distorters. You have to say to anti-Semites, you are anti-Semites. You are endangering your own societies. Forget about Jews. The Jews are a small minority everywhere. You are attacking your own society. because anti-Semitism is a cancer that eats the body politic of every society that it appears in. And I think that that is a very major argument.
Thank you. And of course, it goes without saying that in order to equip young people to be able to make those attacks, to be active in that endeavor, they need a solid, good, quality understanding of the Holocaust. It needs that foundation. And that, of course, is the challenge of our teachers out there, is in curriculum, in schools, to be able to teach the Holocaust in such a way to 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, that they emerge with a solid, quality, in-depth understanding of the Holocaust in order to do that. So that is indeed the challenge, and the work that we at the UCL Centre for Holocaust Education and many other organizations who are listening in are trying very hard to do. And we do have some fantastic, amazing examples of excellence in teaching about the Holocaust in England, in the UK. So thank you very, very much, Yehuda. But before we bring this to a close, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, who is the Executive Director of UCL Centre for Holocaust Education, Professor Stuart Foster, who would like to say a few words to you.
Thank you, Ruth-Anne. Well, as ever, it was a remarkable talk, passionate, inspirational, thought-provoking, what we've always come to expect from you, Yehuda, and it was a great privilege to hear you talk this evening. And talk on a very important subject, on the issue of distortion. It's something that I think all of us as educators treat very seriously, and looking for ways to address the issues that it provokes. So thank you for talking in such passionate terms tonight. And of course, you've been a friend of our centre since we began in 2008, 12 years ago, and we're so grateful for your support. And it's always inspiring to hear your powerful words. And tonight, of course, no exception. Ideally, of course, as we've discussed, we'd love to have hosted you in London. We'd love to have met you, discussed with you. They are always incredible occasions for us all. And we've had the privilege of doing that on a number of occasions, but we had to take the opportunity we had and to invite you to this webinar. And so it was great to speak to you virtually, and thank you for letting us come into your home in Israel and share some of those really important points that you made. It was a great privilege. And also, I just want to say, and I'm sure everyone else that's listening, I just absolutely awestruck by, here you are in your 90s, how incredible you are. You just, the authority of which you speak. I mean, I don't think you spoke with any notes. I mean, I don't think you referred to any notes while you were speaking, which I just think is quite remarkable. I'm just approaching my 30th birthday, and if I spoke with that spirit and energy when I'm your age, no, I'm obviously telling lies, but incredible. And I just thought I had to say that. I just was awestruck by how you presented and how you talk with such knowledge and authority. So I just had to say that. And I don't know, 94? Are you 94, Yehuda? Is that 94? Just remarkable.
Actually 9 plus 4, so I'm 13.
Amazing. But I mean, I think quite seriously, as you've repeatedly argued, our responsibility is to educate future generations to safeguard the historical record, safeguarding the historical record, to tell the truth, to speak based on evidence, not on ideology or propaganda. And I think that's so important. And I know through the efforts of all of our colleagues, Ruth-Anne mentioned a number of the organisations that are here listening tonight, and all our colleagues in those organisations, and all of us at the UCL Centre for Holocaust Education take that responsibility really seriously. It's really important, it's vital work to address those key issues, to safeguard the history of the Holocaust for future generations. And it will continue, but thank you for inspiring us on that very, very important message that you communicated clearly tonight. And I just think, just very briefly, if I may, I'm not going to speak for very long, but if I may, I'd also like to thank my colleagues Ruth-Anne Lenga, who orchestrated this evening, and Evangelos Himonides, Professor Evangelos Himonides, who actually gave us his technical expertise to make sure this happened. But finally, I just really want to return and say a warm thank you to all of us in England. Thank you so much for your inspiring words, for your passion, and for your support. We really, really deeply appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Everybody, I wish you well. This brings this webinar, this wonderful webinar with Professor Yehuda Bauer to an end. We wish you well. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for myself. I'm going to be closing this meeting right now. Information about how to access the recorded webinar will become available on the Centre for Holocaust Education's website in due course. Thank you very much all. Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yehuda. Take care now. Thank you.